Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're talking about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 2024 NFL Draft Class Review, looking at production, athleticism, and other statistical factors to determine how well the Buccaneers did in this particular draft class. To learn more about the stuff that I do in terms of my grading system, you can go to my top 50 prospect video to kind of learn about my correlations at the positions, how I do my grading. Past draft reviews, I also did a lot of the, like my first 10 to 15 of them. I went into more detail in terms of my grading system there, so you can kind of learn more there. But just do that if you want to. But with all that stuff out of the way, let's get to the needs assessment. So before the draft even starts, you kind of have to get an idea of what the needs are for the Buccaneers. And I know every team is going to have a different perspective in terms of what their needs are. But I judge the needs based on how they actually performed, which is the NFL positional AV. So this takes a look at, okay, how do they actually perform as prospects? And then I look at the data grade. So the data grade is what their grade was prior to being drafted in the NFL. So that's there as well. But again, mostly it's NFL positional value, and then also is the age of the prospects as well, because typically the older a prospect is, the larger the need is to replace that player in the future. So based on this, I would kind of identify the top needs on offense being the quarterback. The quarterback would be one of those positions. I understand everybody's a big fan of Baker Mayfield and everything else like that, but his average play over the course of his career hasn't been the best. If he keeps it up, I think he can improve this number, of course. But so far, his average approximate value over the course of the seasons that he's played has not been the best. The running back position is another area that could need improvement, tight end as well. Then when you get to the defensive side of the football, linebacker and cornerback, those are big, big needs as well that they need to address. So those are the largest needs that I could identify based on a data perspective of the team. Again, based on their actual NFL performance per year, and then also based on the age of the prospects that are there. So based on all that information, the biggest factors in my final grade, just so you guys know, is I look to see, did they meet their roster needs? The biggest needs that I could identify is linebacker, quarterback, running back, and tight end. Did they draft good prospects? Because if you don't draft good prospects, you're going to end up drafting more in the future. And the way that I grade good prospects is prospects that have at least a 70 or higher data grade. Based on the research and the data that I've done, the vast majority of long-term starting players, about 86 to 90% of long-term starters in the NFL, typically have a 70 or higher data grade at the position. So if a prospect has below that grade coming out of college, they're less likely going to become a starter. There still is a chance that a guy who has a 90 plus percentile grade could bust, of course, but for the vast majority of them, um, I would say you're more likely going to find a starter drafting a 70 or higher guy versus a 60, 50, 40 percentile guy. And that's just how the data has been over the last 30 plus years at the position. Then, of course, you have did they draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform their draft status? This is another big pet peeve of mine is that a lot of people will point out, well, this guy is here to play special teams. Well, if he's here to play special teams, then you shouldn't have drafted him because special teams player have very low approximate value overall for the team. Now, if this player becomes a starter at the linebacker position, at the safety position, etc., that's different. But if you're having a guy who's only on the roster to play special teams, ooh, baby, like that's just they're not on the field enough to really justify taking them that long. Because again, a lot of it's just like who's on the field more, most of the more the players that are on the field the most are offensive and defensive players. It's not special teamers. Yes, special teams can have an impact, but not as much as you think they can. And I'm going to be doing a video in the future going over special teams versus offense and defense, etc., in terms of wins on the football field. But that's the general thing. So overall, after all that stuff's out of the way, let's get to the first pick for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and pick 26, Graham Barton, center out of Duke. His data grade is 99.46 out of 100. His floor grade is 89.34, and balance grade is 94.63. The data grade is the ceiling for all of his metrics all combined. So his athleticism traits, his physical metrics, all those types of things. So all you need to know about Graham Barton is that his testing numbers, along with everything else, about him from a statistical standpoint. He is 99% better than the vast majority of offensive centers in the past, as far back as probably the 1996 NFL draft class. His floor deals with the average AV of a prospect selected where he was selected for his position and for his grade. So essentially, most players taken at pick 26 who score a 99 percentile data grade typically have about 89 percentile NFL value long term. And then the balance grade kind of takes his ceiling and marries it with his grade. So in other words, the overall to balance out his ceiling with his floor, he would probably be more so a 94 percentile type of prospect, if you will. And then the pick AV deals with the average AV of a randomly selected player here. So every position, whether it's running back, wide receiver, etc., if they were selected at pick 26, most of the time they usually became an 89 percentile prospect at the next level. So all in all, though, I would give Graham Barton an A. When you look at his athleticism traits, he was tremendous. He had a 75 percentile, actually really high percentile, explosion score and speed score, and all those areas are very decent for him. When you look at the average All-Pro score, not exactly where you want it to be, but overall, this was a great overall data profile for him. And then, of course, when you get to pick 57 and Chris Braswell, edge out of Alabama, his data grade is 73.05 out of 100. His projected floor is 58.98, and his balance grade is 66 percentile. Overall pick AV would be 75.68, with overall pick grade of a C. Based on his production traits, he had not the best, good sack and TFL data, so he had above average backfield production, but his solo tackle data is not exactly where you want it to be. When you look at his other market share traits, he did really good in terms of forced fumble market share, not so good in terms of pass deflection market share. When you look at athleticism traits, he had near elite speed for his size with average explosiveness. And then adjusted production wise, he wasn't really near the starter averages of the position. So he didn't quite hit the MSA rating or the pass rating, which is the production adjusted for the level of competition and the team that they were on compared to other prospects. So that's one area where I think he needs to improve. Then, of course, you get to pick 89 and Tyke Smith, safety out of Georgia. His data grade was 77.74 out of 100. His projected floor is 54, and balance grade is 66.14. With overall pick AV being 72.59, I would give this grade a C for him. Taking a look at his production traits, he had near elite interception data with significantly below average pass deflection data and above average solo tackle data. Looking at athleticism traits, he had near elite speed with above average explosiveness and above average flexibility. And then adjusted production wise, he had about 70 percentile in terms of his adjusted production traits, but not exactly elite in this particular area. So I would kind of see him more as a C grade player based on his overall data. Then, of course, you get to pick 92 and Jalen McMillian, wide receiver out of Washington. His data grade was 66.85. His floor is 53. His balance grade is 60. And his pick AV is 68.73. Overall pick grade would be 68.73 for his. I would say overall pick grade would be a D. Now, when you take a look at his wide receiver market share production, he was below average in terms of his receiving market share, above average total offensive market share, and average touchdown market share. So he wasn't really the most productive player. I understand people are going to talk about how much talent they had at Washington, but he just really wasn't the most productive player at Washington. Wasn't really able to stick out compared to the competition there. Then, of course, when you look at efficiency traits, he was about average in terms of his efficiency. So for the times he actually did get the football, he wasn't that efficient. He didn't have great touchdowns per touch, didn't have great yards per reception. He was just kind of average in every single metric here in terms of that. Then when you look at athleticism traits, he was above average in terms of explosiveness, speed, and flexibility. Pretty much hits the starter, all pro, and Pro Bowl areas in terms of athleticism traits. But when you look at adjusted production, he's above the starter averages, but not really near the Pro Bowl and all pro areas. So the overall potential for Jalen would be like a starter, but he doesn't really have that Pro Bowl or All Pro upside to him. So there is a chance he could become a starter, but he's closer to say again, he doesn't really have that high quality upside to him based on data. Then, of course, we get to pick 125 and Bucky Irving, running back out of Oregon. His data grade is 68.83. His floor is 45.90. His balance grade is 57, and his pick AV is 53.67. Overall pick grade for this would be a D. Taking a look at his offensive receiving and touchdown market share, he has above average receiving market share with average receiving total offensive market share and below average touchdown market share. So his production wasn't really that impressive. When you look at his efficiency scores, he did really well in terms of yards per touch, and TD percentage was above average, but he actually had below average yards per reception, which is kind of weird because of his receiving production, in college. And then when you look at his athleticism traits, it's non-existent. Below average explosiveness, significantly below average speed. There has never been a long-term starter in terms of 64 starts in his career for a running back who's tested this poorly athletically. So that's going to be a big concern going forward. He's going to have to be one of one. He's going to have to be one of the biggest outliers at the running back position ever if he was to have a significant role in the NFL. So I understand they might view him more as a rotational guy, but I don't expect Irving to be a really great player. I know there's a lot of big fans of him on film, but his overall data is very concerning. And then when you get to adjusted production traits, his adjusted production is closer to like starter averages. So there is that chance that he could become a starter when you look at his overall data, but that's a general concerns with him is, based on his overall data, there are some concerns based on his athleticism traits for him. Then, of course, we get to pick 220, Elijah Klein, offensive guard out of UTEP. Based on his data grade, he had a 41.40 score. Floor was 38. His balance grade was 39, and pick AV was 16.99. His overall pick grade would be a F. Taking a look at his athleticism traits, he had below average, I would say, explosiveness and below average speed. He did have above average flexibility, but when you look at the All Pro averages and the Pro Bowl averages and the starter averages at the position, he doesn't quite hit any of those areas for him. So not the best pick. And then the last pick for the Bucks at pick 246 in Devin Culp, tight end out of Washington. He had a data grade of 42.49. His floor is 18.78 and balance grade is 30.64. Overall pick AV would be 10.42. Overall pick grade would be a F. So based on his data grade, 42 percentile is not the best in terms of your data grade. Then when you look at his production, below average in terms of receiving market share, total offensive market share, and touchdown market share. You take a look at his efficiency scores, below average in terms of all of his efficiency. You look at his athleticism traits. He had a 93 percentile speed score, which is a really good trait. That's the biggest trait for him, is he does have really good speed for his size. But then when you look at his adjusted production traits, his production for his level of competition and everything else is just not where you want it to be. So I don't expect him to become a really good player long term. He does have a shot to maybe develop into like a backup rotational tight end, but he's also very undersized for the position. So we'll see what happens with him. But overall, this was not the best selection. Overall final grade for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers would be a D. Did they meet all their roster needs? I would say no. Did they draft good prospects? Yes and no. Did they draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform their draft status? I would say yes and no. The Bucs started the draft really well, taking a potential All-Pro interior offensive lineman in Graham Barton, but the rest of the draft neither met their needs nor were they the caliber of prospects that have high success rates based on data. So the biggest analogy I use for this is instead of betting on black or red at the roulette table, it's like you took your chip and you put it on 22. So you could win big putting it on 22, but most of the time you would want to bet on black or red because those give you the best chance of hitting in the future. And all the Bucks did past the first couple of picks was bet on 22 and then bet on 22 and then bet on 22 and then bet on 22. So this class has a very low likelihood of every single pick making it long term. I mean, we'll keep track of it and see what happens, but this was a concerning draft. This just wasn't the best draft from a data perspective. So we'll see what happens with them. Again, probability is not certainty. So there are definitely going to be some prospects who outperform the data projections that I had. But overall, that's kind of how the class turned out. With all that out of the way, thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Jim Coburn. You can follow my other work at Draft Coburn. Well, actually, not Draft Coburn, but on patreon.com/jcoburn. You can also check out my X, formerly known as Twitter account, at Gymmetrics. And make sure you also consider buying the 2024 NFL Draft Analytics Guide, available today. Link is in the description. If you want to learn more about the prospects that the Buccaneers selected, the vast majority of the ones I just mentioned are in that guide. and you can learn more about them, learn more about my evaluation process and the history long journey to get here. And with all that stuff away, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.